Millionaire chef invites street boy and his mother to dinner. When he sees who she is, his world turns upside down, a heartwarming tale of fate, redemption, and unbelievable connections. Before we dive into the story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. Stay tuned until the end, things are about to get intense. Now, let's get into it. Aidan Westbrook stood at the pinnacle of the culinary world. His name adorned high-end restaurants in cities across the globe, from New York to Paris to Tokyo. Each establishment was a reflection of his vision, sleek, modern spaces where innovation met impeccable taste. His flagship restaurant, the Westbrook, located in the heart of Manhattan, was a destination for celebrities, food critics, and anyone willing to pay top dollar for an unforgettable meal. Aidan had become a household name, appearing on magazine covers, talk shows, and cooking competitions, hailed as a culinary genius. But Aidan's rise to fame wasn't handed to him. He had built his empire from the ground up, coming from a background far removed from the glittering dining rooms he now presided over. Born in Detroit, Aidan grew up in a working-class neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, and survival often meant learning to make do with very little. Life had dealt him a tough hand early on. He lost both of his parents in a car accident when he was just 6 years old. Orphaned and alone, Aidan was taken in by his uncle Jonah, the man who would shape not just his childhood but his entire life. Jonah was no stranger to hard work. He owned a small diner on the outskirts of Detroit, a no-nonsense place where factory workers, truck drivers, and local regulars came for a hot meal and a friendly word. It wasn't fancy, but it was dependable, much like Jonah himself. For Aidan, that diner became his refuge. From a young age, he spent his afternoons there after school, watching his uncle flip burgers, fry eggs, and serve customers with a steady hand and a smile. The clatter of dishes, the sizzle of meat on the grill, and the warmth of the diner became the backdrop to Aidan's childhood. Jonah didn't just raise Aidan, he taught him the value of grit and determination. The diner was a tough business, and money was often tight, but Jonah never complained. He worked long hours, barely taking a day off, making sure Aidan had food on the table and a roof over his head. And while Jonah wasn't a chef in the fine dining sense, he instilled in Aidan an appreciation for the craft of cooking, for feeding people with heart. Under his uncle's watchful eye, Aidan learned the basics of the kitchen, sweeping floors, bussing tables, and eventually helping Jonah behind the counter. Those years in the diner shaped Aidan's work ethic and ignited the spark that would one day turn him into one of the most celebrated chefs in the world. Detroit might have been miles away from the glamorous life Aidan now led, but it was the place that formed him, and Uncle Jonah was the man who gave him the foundation to build his empire. The hum of the diner kitchen was where it all started for Aidan. Back then, he was just a kid with wide eyes and small hands, standing on a stool so he could reach the counter. His uncle, Jonah, would watch him with a half-smile, amused by the boy's curiosity but never discouraging it. Jonah was a man of few words, but when it came to the kitchen, he had plenty to teach. "Always respect your ingredients," Jonah would say, flipping a burger with a flick of his wrist, the sizzle hitting the air. "Doesn't matter if it's the finest steak or the cheapest cut of beef. You give it care, it'll give you something good." Aidan soaked up every lesson. At first, it was simple things, cracking eggs without leaving bits of shell, grilling a sandwich just right so the bread toasted golden brown but the cheese didn't ooze out onto the griddle. Small victories that made him proud, especially when Jonah let him take charge of the stove for the breakfast crowd. Pancakes, bacon, scrambled eggs, it was like a symphony of flavors coming together, and Aidan loved it. But it wasn't just about the food. There was a rhythm to the diner, an order in the chaos. Jonah had a way of moving through the kitchen that was like second nature, knowing when to push and when to ease up. He taught Aidan that cooking wasn't just about technique. It was about paying attention, understanding how the food felt, how it reacted to heat and seasoning. Cooking was alive, and Jonah made sure Aidan felt that too. "People eat with more than their mouths, kid. They eat with their hearts," Jonah would say when a customer smiled after their first bite. And Aiden believed him. Every dish that came out of that kitchen was more than food, it was a connection, a way of making someone's day just a little better. As the years went on, Aiden started coming to the diner not just because he had to, but because he wanted to. The place became a kind of haven for him, somewhere he felt in control. It was also where he saw his uncle in his element. Jonah wasn't a fancy chef by any means, but the people loved him. They loved the way he remembered their orders, the way he made everyone feel like they belonged. Aiden learned that, too, that food had the power to bring people together in ways that words couldn't. But then, one day, the rhythm changed. It started subtly, Jonah rubbing his chest now and then, moving a little slower than usual. Aiden noticed, but said nothing, thinking maybe his uncle was just tired. After all, the man never took a day off. Then came the night that Jonah collapsed in the kitchen, the night everything Aiden knew shifted in a heartbeat. Aiden had just locked the front door when he heard the heavy thud from the back. At first, he thought maybe Jonah had dropped something, but the silence that followed felt wrong. His feet moved before his mind did, and when he reached the kitchen, Jonah was on the floor, clutching his chest, his face pale. "Uncle Jonah!" Aiden's voice cracked as he rushed to his side. But his uncle didn't respond. His eyes were open, but there was no recognition in them, just pain. Aiden fumbled for the phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers, but deep down, he already knew. The paramedics came, took him away on a stretcher, but it didn't matter. The moment the heart monitor flatlined, Aiden's world did too. He was 16. Too young to lose another parent figure, but old enough to understand that life wasn't going to wait for him to catch his breath. Jonah's death hit Aiden like a truck. For weeks, he wandered around in a fog, unsure of what to do next. The diner was closed indefinitely, he couldn't run it alone, and there was no one left to help him. He tried reopening it once, but the place felt wrong without Jonah there. It was like the heart of the diner had gone with him, leaving behind only empty seats and cold stoves. Eventually, Aiden had no choice but to sell the diner. It was a decision that felt like betrayal, like giving up the last piece of Jonah he had left. But what else could he do? The bills piled up, and there was no money to keep the place running. The day he handed over the keys to a new owner, Aiden felt like he'd lost Jonah all over again. With the diner gone, Aiden drifted. He took on odd jobs in kitchens around Detroit, washing dishes, sweeping floors, doing whatever he could to make rent. He never stayed anywhere long, there was nothing to stay for. The world seemed dimmer, the noise of the kitchen less inviting than it used to be. Cooking didn't hold the same joy, not without Jonah's voice guiding him. For a time, Aiden wondered if he was lost for good. He couldn't see a path forward, couldn't imagine where he belonged anymore. Without Jonah, without the diner, he felt like a boat without a rudder, drifting wherever the current took him. But even in the darkest moments, the lessons Jonah had taught him lingered. Every time Aiden picked up a spatula, every time he fried an egg or chopped an onion, he heard his uncle's voice in the back of his mind. Respect the ingredients. Cook like you mean it. Those words stayed with him, even when everything else felt like it was slipping away. It was a rainy afternoon when Aiden received the phone call that would change his life. He was standing in the cramped kitchen of yet another nameless restaurant, washing dishes, and wondering, for the 100th time, how long he could keep this up. Life had felt like an endless cycle of late shifts, grease stains, and the lingering feeling of being stuck in a place he didn't belong. The ring of his phone broke through the monotony, and when he saw the number flash on the screen, he almost didn't answer. But something made him pick it up. "Aiden Westbrook?" the voice on the other end asked, as if they weren't entirely sure he still existed. "Yeah, that's me," Aiden replied, drying his hands on a towel, expecting another bill collector or someone trying to sell him something. "This is Molly Turner. I'm a producer with Masterflame," she said, her voice steady and confident, like she had just dropped the name of the most important show on television, and she had. Aiden blinked, the water dripping off his fingers forgotten. He remembered Master Flame. Hell, everyone who'd ever picked up a spatula knew Master Flame. It was the show where the best chefs in the country competed in a high-stakes culinary battle, watched by millions. The idea of being on it was so far removed from his current reality that for a second, he thought she had the wrong number. "I'm sorry, what?" Aiden finally managed to get out. "I used to come to your uncle's diner," Molly explained, a warmth creeping into her voice. "Back when I was starting out in Detroit, before I moved to New York. I remember you, the kid who was always in the kitchen, flipping pancakes like it was the most important job in the world. You've got something, Aiden. I'd like you to come and audition for Master Flame." Aiden didn't know what to say. The air in the kitchen felt too thick, the smell of dish soap and old grease suddenly too heavy. Molly waited on the other end of the line, giving him space to process the offer. "Molly, he hesitated, unsure how to explain the tangled mess of emotions running through him. He hadn't stepped foot in a real kitchen, a kitchen where food was more than a paycheck, since Jonah's diner closed. He hadn't felt like he was someone in so long that the idea of competing on national television seemed ludicrous. "You don't have to give me an answer right now," Molly said gently, sensing his hesitation. "But think about it. You deserve a chance to show people what you can do. I'll send you the audition details. Just give it a shot, okay?" Aiden promised he'd think about it, but after the call ended, he couldn't shake the disbelief. Master Flame? He didn't belong there. He was a diner kid, not some polished, classically trained chef. But later that night, as he lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling of his tiny apartment, the thought lingered. What if he could do it? What if he gave it everything he had? What did he really have to lose? 3 weeks later, Aiden found himself standing on the set of Master Flame for the first time. The lights were brighter than anything he'd ever seen, the kitchen spotless, gleaming with equipment he'd only ever dreamed of using. All around him, chefs bustled, getting ready for the first challenge, and Aiden felt out of place in his worn shoes and old apron. But when Molly came by and gave him a reassuring nod, something inside him steadied. The first challenge hit hard, a 3-course meal in under an hour, using only the ingredients in the mystery box before them. Aiden's heart raced as he lifted the lid, revealing an assortment of seafood, citrus, and herbs. His mind went blank for a moment, but then, somewhere in the chaos, Jonah's voice whispered in his ear, calm and clear, "Cook like you mean it." And so he did. Aiden worked faster than he ever had, his hands moving with the precision and confidence Jonah had instilled in him years ago. He filleted the fish with care, zesting lemon into the sauce, layering flavors like he was back in the diner experimenting with Jonah's simple but effective techniques. He didn't look up at the clock until the final seconds, plating his dish with just enough time to spare. When the judges tasted his food, their expressions shifted from skepticism to surprise. They didn't know who this kid was or where he'd come from, but it was clear he was here to stay. Each week, Aiden proved that, going up against chefs with far more experience and formal training, but holding his own through sheer determination and the cooking skills Jonah had drilled into him. He stayed up late, practiced in his tiny kitchen until his hands ached, and studied flavors like his life depended on it, because, in a way, it did. As the competition narrowed, so did Aiden's focus. The final challenge arrived before he knew it: create a signature dish that represented who he was as a chef. And for Aiden, that answer had always been clear. He made a modern take on Jonah's famous pot roast, slow cooking the meat to perfection and serving it with an elegant twist on mashed potatoes and a rich gravy that tasted like home. When he presented it to the judges, he held his breath, waiting for their verdict. The silence stretched long after their first bites, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Then, finally, one judge put down his fork and nodded. "You've got something special, Aiden," the judge said, his voice carrying weight. "This isn't just food, it's a story. And I think the world's going to want to hear more of it." And just like that, Aiden Westbrook was named the Master Flame champion. The win wasn't just a title. It was a lifeline. Suddenly, doors that had been slammed shut for so long began to open. Investors came knocking, offers poured in, and Aiden, for the first time in years, saw a future that wasn't clouded by doubt or uncertainty. His career had been launched into the stratosphere, and the kid from Detroit who had once doubted his place in the world now had the culinary stage at his feet. It was a late autumn afternoon in New York, the kind where the chill sneaks in before the sun has even set. Aiden Westbrook stood at the entrance of the Westbrook, one of his most prized restaurants, sipping a coffee while overseeing the evening preparations. His eyes swept the bustling street, watching the daily rhythm of the city, the pedestrians rushing by, the taxis honking, and the shoppers darting in and out of high-end boutiques. It was a familiar scene, one he usually paid little mind to. But today, something caught his eye. Across the street, just outside a subway entrance, a young boy stood with a small cardboard box. He couldn't have been more than 10 or 11, thin and dressed in clothes that had seen better days. In his hands, the boy clutched what looked like small bags of snacks, calling out to passers-by, trying to make a sale. Few people even glanced his way. Aiden's chest tightened. There was something in the boy's face, a mix of determination and exhaustion, that struck him hard. He had been that kid once, standing on a corner, feeling invisible, trying to push through the grind of survival. He knew that look too well. Setting his coffee cup down, Aiden walked across the street. As he approached, the boy's eyes flicked up at him, wary but hopeful. "Hey there," Aiden said, crouching down to the boy's level. "What are you selling?" The boy's voice was soft, almost lost in the city noise. "Snacks. Pretzels, some granola bars. Trying to help my mom out." Aiden nodded, taking a better look at the boy's face. His cheeks were a bit hollow, his hands red from the cold. There was a resilience in his eyes, though, something Aiden recognized immediately. The boy had been through more than his fair share, that much was clear. "Business any good?" Aiden asked, his tone light, though his heart felt heavy. The boy shrugged. "Not really. People don't buy much from me. But I gotta try." "What's your name?" "Noah." Aiden nodded again, standing up. He wasn't sure what he was going to do yet, but he couldn't just walk away. There was something about this kid, something that made it impossible to turn a blind eye. Maybe it was the reminder of who he'd been not so long ago, or maybe it was the stubborn hope in Noah's eyes. "You hungry, Noah?" Aiden asked, motioning toward the Westbrook. "How about you come inside, have a meal? You can warm up for a bit." Noah looked at the restaurant, then back at Aiden. He shifted on his feet, clearly unsure. "I don't have any money, mister." Aiden smiled. "Don't worry about that. The meal's on me. Come on." After a moment's hesitation, Noah nodded, following Aiden across the street. The warmth of the restaurant hit them both as soon as they stepped inside, the soft murmur of diners and the rich smells of gourmet cooking filling the space. Aiden led Noah to a small table near the back, out of the main flow of traffic but close enough to the kitchen that he could keep an eye on things. One of the waitstaff came by, and Aiden gave a quick order for a hot meal, something hearty, something that would fill Noah's stomach and warm him up from the inside out. The boy sat quietly, his hands resting on the table, his eyes scanning the restaurant with quiet awe. "Is this your place?" Noah finally asked, after a long stretch of silence. "Yeah," Aiden said, leaning back in his chair. "One of them." Noah's eyes widened a bit, but he didn't say anything. After a few minutes, a plate arrived, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and vegetables, with a warm roll on the side. Noah looked at the food like he hadn't seen anything like it in years. He picked up his fork and started to eat slowly, at first, but then the hunger took over. He finished half the plate before he even glanced up. "This is really good," Noah said between bites, and Aiden smiled. It was a simple meal, not one of the more intricate dishes the Westbrook was known for, but it didn't need to be. Sometimes, the simplest things made the biggest impact. As Noah continued eating, Aiden leaned forward. So, you're helping your mom, huh? Is she okay? Noah slowed down a little, glancing at his plate. She's been sick. For a while now. She can't work much. I try to help with what I can, selling snacks and stuff. His voice was matter of fact, but Aiden could hear the weight behind it. The boy was carrying more than any kid should have to. How long has she been sick? Aiden asked, keeping his tone gentle, not wanting to pry too much, but wanting to understand more. A year, maybe more, Noah said quietly. We moved here not long ago, after my dad left. It's just me and her now. Aiden's stomach twisted at the words. It was a familiar story, one he'd heard before, families struggling to stay afloat, kids like Noah growing up too fast, learning how to hustle because they didn't have a choice. Aiden couldn't just let him walk out of here and back into the cold, not without doing something. Noah, Aiden said after a pause, would you and your mom like to come back here for dinner tomorrow? Bring her with you. I'd like to meet her. Maybe we can talk about how I can help out. Noah blinked, his fork halfway to his mouth. Really? Really? Aiden smiled, though there was a heaviness behind it. I've been where you are, kid. I know what it's like. I'd like to help. Noah stared at him for a moment, his expression a mix of confusion and gratitude, as though he wasn't quite sure if this was real or not. But slowly, a smile broke across his face. It was small, hesitant, but it was there. Okay, Noah said quietly. I'll tell her. Aiden nodded, watching the boy finish his meal. There was something deep in his chest, an old ache, knowing that tomorrow might just be the first step in something bigger. He didn't know what would come of it yet, but he knew one thing for certain, he wasn't going to let Noah and his mom disappear back into the shadows of the city, not if he could help it. As Noah stood to leave, he glanced back at Aiden one more time. Thanks. For the food. You're welcome, Aiden said. See you tomorrow. Aiden stood by the entrance of the Westbrook, glancing at his watch. He'd just seen Noah dash inside the restaurant, his eyes bright and a nervous energy buzzing around him. But now, as the door opened again, Aiden's breath caught in his throat. The woman who stepped inside looked familiar in a way that made his heart skip. It took him a second to place her, but when he did, the shock nearly knocked him off his feet. Molly Turner. She wasn't the vibrant, confident woman he remembered from the Masterflame set, but the lines of her face and the way she carried herself were unmistakable. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was now tied back in a loose, messy bun, and the dark circles under her eyes told a story of sleepless nights and long days. She looked thinner, too, like life had worn her down piece by piece. But it was her. The woman who had given him his break. The woman who had believed in him when no one else had. And now, she stood in the doorway of his restaurant, eyes downcast, holding Noah's hand. Aiden's mind reeled, connecting the dots. Molly, Noah's mother. The boy had never mentioned her name, and Aiden had been too caught up in the moment to ask. He'd been ready to offer help to a stranger, but this wasn't just anyone. This was Molly, the woman who had launched his career, the one person who had pushed him to take a chance on himself. And now she was the one who needed help. Mom, Noah said, tugging on her hand, this is Aiden. He owns this place. Molly looked up, her eyes locking onto Aiden's, and for a split second, there was recognition, followed by confusion, then something that looked like embarrassment. Aiden, she asked softly, her voice hoarse, like she wasn't sure it was really him. Aiden took a step forward, his expression softening. Molly. I can't believe it's you. For a moment, they just stood there, the weight of the past pressing between them. The last time Aiden had seen Molly was in the bright, bustling studio of Masterflame, her face glowing with the success of another season wrapped. She had been at the top of her game, producing one of the most watched shows on television. Now, standing in front of him, she looked fragile, like life had been stripping pieces from her little by little. She gave a small, tight smile, her hand moving to rest on Noah's shoulder. Yeah, it's me. Life's different now. There was no need for more explanation. Aiden could see the toll the past few years had taken on her, the weariness in her posture, the guarded look in her eyes. He gestured toward an empty table near the back, a quiet corner away from the main dining room, and the three of them moved to sit. Once they were settled, Aiden didn't waste any time. Molly, what happened? I mean, I can see, but how did things get to this point? Molly sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. She glanced at Noah, who was still watching the exchange with wide, curious eyes, and she gave him a small nod. Noah, why don't you go check out the kitchen? Aiden's staff can show you around while we talk. Noah's face lit up at the prospect of seeing the kitchen of a restaurant like the Westbrook, and Aiden quickly signaled one of his chefs to give the boy a tour. As soon as Noah was out of earshot, Molly's shoulders slumped. She looked down at her hands, and when she spoke, her voice was raw, stripped of any pretense. It started about 3 years ago, she began, her gaze distant. After Master Flame, things were going well, you know? I had a few other shows lined up, and Noah's dad, David, well, I thought things were okay. But it all came crashing down pretty fast. Aiden listened intently, feeling a strange mix of guilt and sorrow. He had been living his dream, while Molly, the woman who had helped him get there, had been struggling in silence. David left, she continued, her voice tightening with emotion. Just, one day, he packed up and walked out. Said he couldn't handle the pressure anymore, couldn't deal with Noah, couldn't deal with me. She paused, swallowing hard. It hit me like a truck. We had bills piling up, Noah was still so young, and suddenly I was a single mom with a career that wasn't as stable as I thought. Aiden leaned forward, his brows knitted in concern. What about the shows? I thought you had more projects lined up. I did, Molly said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her tone. But after David left, everything just kind of fell apart. I couldn't keep up with the work, couldn't focus. Then I got sick, nothing major at first, just exhaustion, stress. But it got worse. I had to take time off, and without a steady paycheck, everything started spiraling. Savings drained fast. I tried to do freelance work, but my health kept getting in the way. And Noah, he's been amazing, but it's not fair to him. We've been barely scraping by for the past year. She exhaled shakily, and for the first time, Aiden saw just how fragile she really was. He had known Molly as strong, unshakable, the type of woman who could juggle a million things at once and make it all look easy. Seeing her like this, vulnerable and worn down, hit him hard. Molly, he said quietly, I had no idea. If I'd known, She shook her head, cutting him off. I didn't want anyone to know. I'd been trying to hold it together, for Noah. But it's gotten to the point where I can't do this on my own anymore. Aiden's chest tightened as he listened, feeling the weight of her words. There was a part of him that couldn't shake the feeling of guilt, guilt for not knowing, guilt for living his dream while Molly had been struggling just to stay afloat. Molly, he said softly, let me help. She blinked, taken aback, as if the idea of accepting help was foreign to her. Aiden, I don't. I'm not offering charity, Aiden interrupted gently. But you gave me a chance when I had nothing. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Let me return the favor. Molly's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she bit her lip, as though holding back a flood of emotions. I don't know what to say. Aiden sat across from Molly at the quiet corner table in the Westbrook, his thoughts racing but his heart clear. The conversation they had just shared lingered in the air like a heavy mist. He saw the weariness in her eyes, the quiet resignation she had carried for far too long. But more than that, he saw the spark that hadn't fully dimmed, the Molly Turner who had once been unstoppable. She wasn't gone, she was just waiting for someone to pull her back to the surface. Molly fiddled with the edge of her napkin, her eyes darting nervously around the room. It was as though she could barely believe she was sitting there, talking to Aiden Westbrook, the man whose career she had once jump-started. The irony wasn't lost on her, but the weight of her circumstances made it hard to appreciate. "I don't know how to thank you," Molly said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For listening, for even thinking about helping." Aiden leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Molly, you helped me when no one else would. You saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself back then. You gave me a shot. That's not something I'm ever going to forget." Her eyes met his, soft but still tinged with doubt. "I was just doing my job." "No," Aiden shook his head. "It was more than that. You believed in me. And that's why I'm sitting here, running these restaurants. Now it's my turn." Molly bit her lip, clearly struggling to let herself accept his help. Pride, Aiden thought. It's a hard thing to set aside, especially when life has forced you to rely only on yourself for so long. He knew that feeling all too well. "Molly, I've got an idea," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I know things have been tough, but I see what you're still capable of. You've got skills that would be a huge asset to my business. I don't want to just help you out of this situation. I want you to work with me." She blinked, confusion flashing across her face. "Work with you? What would I even do?" "You've got a strong background in media and marketing," Aiden said, his voice gaining confidence. "You're brilliant at managing people, building narratives, getting people excited. I could use someone like you to help build my brand. The Westbrook is successful, but it could be even more than it is. And my other restaurants? They're doing well, but I want them to thrive. I want to take the business to the next level. I think you could help me do that." Molly stared at him, processing what he was saying, her fingers still clutching the napkin. "You mean, like a PR role? For the whole restaurant chain?" Aiden nodded. "Exactly. I'm offering you the position of public relations manager for my restaurants. You'll have control over the messaging, the media campaigns, the outreach. You'll help shape how we're perceived, how we connect with people. You know this world better than anyone I've worked with, and you've proven time and again that you can turn things around when they need it." Her mouth opened slightly, and Aiden could see the surprise and disbelief playing out on her face. I don't know what to say," she murmured, glancing down at her hands. "Aiden, I haven't worked in PR for years. I don't even know if I'm still good at it." Aiden smiled, shaking his head. "Molly, I know you are. You've just had a rough stretch. But I know you can do this. And you're not starting from scratch, you've got me in your corner. We'll do this together." She looked up at him, the skepticism in her eyes giving way to something else, something warmer, like hope. "You really think I can help?" "I don't think," Aiden said, leaning forward. "I know you can." Molly was quiet for a moment, weighing his words. Her hand stopped its nervous fidgeting, and she pressed her palms flat against the table. "And Noah?" she asked quietly, the concern for her son woven into her voice. "I need to make sure he's okay, too." Aiden softened, nodding. "Noah's part of this, too. We'll make sure he's taken care of, and if he's interested, he can even spend time in the restaurant, learn some things, maybe even see if he has an interest in cooking. But right now, what matters most is getting you both into a better place." Molly swallowed hard, blinking back what Aiden guessed were tears she didn't want to shed in front of him. "Aiden, I don't know how to thank you. You're offering me a lifeline." "I'm offering you a job, Molly," Aiden said with a half-smile. "One that you're going to knock out of the park. This isn't charity. You're going to earn every penny." She gave a shaky laugh, dabbing at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Well, when you put it that way." Aiden leaned back in his chair, feeling a weight lift from his own chest. This was the right move. He'd always trusted his gut, and right now, every instinct told him that Molly would rise to the challenge. She had been knocked down, but she wasn't out. Not by a long shot. "I'll have my team draw up the paperwork," Aiden said, keeping the tone casual, businesslike, even though inside he felt the warmth of a new chapter opening not just for Molly, but for himself, too. "Take some time to settle things with Noah, and when you're ready, we'll get to work." Molly nodded, her lips pressing into a determined line. "I can't promise it'll be easy, but I'll give it everything I've got." "That's all I'm asking for," Aiden said. "We'll take it one step at a time." Noah bounded back to the table just then, eyes wide with excitement after seeing the inner workings of the kitchen. "Mom! Did you see? It's amazing back there. They let me watch them cook, Anne." Molly smiled, reaching out to tousle his hair. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, sweetheart." Aiden stood, feeling lighter than he had all day. "Well, it looks like we've got a lot to look forward to. Molly, I'll be in touch tomorrow to start getting things set up." Molly rose to her feet, taking Noah's hand. "Thank you, Aiden. For everything." Molly had always been good at finding the right angle. Even in the early days of her TV career, she had a knack for spotting what made a story stand out, what made people care. Now, sitting in her office at the Westbrook, she felt the same old energy coursing through her, familiar, yet long dormant. She'd been with Aiden for a few months now, and the PR work, something she had feared she'd lost her touch for, had come rushing back to her like muscle memory. Aiden's restaurant empire was already a success, but with Molly's touch, it was becoming more than just a series of restaurants. It was turning into a brand, a movement even. Molly found the heart of Aiden's story, his rise from the streets of Detroit, his unshakable belief in second chances, and crafted campaigns that resonated far beyond New York City's high-end dining circles. It wasn't just about the food anymore, it was about Aiden's philosophy, about what food could represent, what it could do. Under her guidance, they launched new social media campaigns, filmed behind-the-scenes videos, and partnered with influential figures in the culinary world. She revitalized the restaurant's website, introduced a newsletter, and arranged high-profile interviews where Aiden's authenticity came through loud and clear. Every move was intentional, and the response was overwhelming. Customers weren't just coming for the food anymore, they wanted to be part of Aiden's journey. And while Molly threw herself into her work, Noah began his own journey alongside her. The boy had been spending more and more time in the kitchen, watching Aiden and his team with a quiet intensity. At first, Noah had been content to stand at the edges, observing, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his eyes never missing a detail. But as the days passed, something in him shifted. One afternoon, while Molly was wrapping up a meeting with Aiden, Noah appeared at the kitchen door. He didn't say much, just stood there, hands behind his back, but Aiden caught the look in his eyes. "You want to help out?" Aiden asked, his tone casual. Noah hesitated for a split second, then nodded. "If it's okay. I won't get in the way." Aiden grinned. "The kitchen's no place for anyone who's afraid of getting in the way. Come on, I'll show you how to chop an onion without losing a finger." That first afternoon, Noah's movements were awkward, his grip on the knife shaky, but there was determination in every slice. Aiden stood beside him, patient but firm, guiding his hands, teaching him the basics. And slowly, Noah began to find his rhythm. The work was hard, but it was satisfying, and as the days passed, Aiden noticed something remarkable. The quiet boy who had first come into the restaurant seemed to transform in the kitchen, his confidence growing with every task he mastered. For Aiden, watching Noah reminded him of himself, those early days with Jonah, when the world outside the kitchen had seemed chaotic, but the kitchen itself had been a place of order, of possibilities. Aiden began mentoring Noah, teaching him everything from knife skills to how to balance flavors, how to think about food as more than just ingredients, but as a way to connect with people. Noah soaked it all in, but it wasn't just about learning how to cook. For the first time in a long while, He felt like he belonged somewhere. The kitchen was a space where he could build something with his hands, something that made people smile, and that made all the difference. One night, after the dinner rush had calmed and the kitchen was quiet again, Aiden and Molly sat down to talk over a glass of wine. They'd both been thinking about the same thing, though neither had voiced it yet. "Have you noticed how much Noah's grown since he started helping out here?" Aiden asked, swirling the wine in his glass. Molly nodded, her expression thoughtful. "He's changing, Aiden. I haven't seen him this happy or this focused in a long time. I think he's found something here." Aiden smiled. "Yeah, I've noticed. And it got me thinking." He paused, letting the idea settle between them. "Noah's just one kid, right? But what if we could do more? What if we could offer this kind of opportunity to other kids like him?" Molly tilted her head, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "A cooking school," Aiden said, the words coming out with a quiet certainty. "For kids who don't have many options, who don't see a path forward. I'm not talking about some high-end culinary academy, I mean a place where kids can learn practical skills, where they can find their own passion in the kitchen. Maybe even turn it into a career someday." Molly set her glass down, a slow smile spreading across her face. "A cooking school for underprivileged kids," she repeated, letting the idea sink in. "That's brilliant, Aiden. You know, with your story, your background, this could be huge. You could really make an impact." "That's the idea," Aiden said, his tone serious. "This business, the restaurants, it's all great. But it doesn't mean as much if I'm not using it to give back. I've been given second chances all my life. I want to offer the same to kids who need it." Molly leaned back in her chair, her mind already racing with possibilities. "We could create partnerships with local organizations, get the word out through the media. I could even pitch a few stories to some journalists I know. This isn't just about cooking, it's about changing lives." Aiden nodded, the excitement building in him. "Exactly. And we could make it accessible. No kid should be left out because they can't afford it. We could get sponsors, host fundraising events, do whatever it takes to keep the school running." As they talked, the plan began to take shape, and over the next few weeks, the dream of the cooking school became a reality. They found a space not far from the Westbrook, a modest but functional building with a kitchen that could be outfitted for classes. They brought in a team of chefs who were not only skilled but passionate about teaching. And most importantly, they reached out to the community, connecting with kids like Noah, kids who were searching for something, a way forward. The first class was small, just a handful of students, but as Aiden watched them chopping, stirring, and tasting their way through the kitchen, he knew they were onto something special. The school wasn't just about teaching kids to cook, it was about showing them that they could build something from nothing, that they had value, that they had a future. It started as a simple idea, a way to reach more kids, more people, with what Aiden and Molly had already built at the cooking school. It was Molly's suggestion, one night over dinner, as they reviewed the latest updates from the school and discussed how to expand its reach. Aiden was already overwhelmed by how quickly things were growing, but Molly had always been able to see possibilities where others saw limits. "A YouTube channel," she'd said casually, like it wasn't a groundbreaking concept. "We could record your lessons, get them out to people who can't be here physically. We make it free, accessible. You've already got the story, the talent, and the following. Let's take this to the next level." Aiden had been hesitant at first. Filming cooking lessons? Sure, he could do it, but would anyone really watch? The internet was full of food content. But Molly was right. What they were offering wasn't just about the food, it was about the heart behind it, the story that had captured so many people already. And Molly, with her PR background, knew exactly how to make it resonate with viewers. Within weeks, they had a plan in place. Molly worked her magic behind the scenes, coordinating with videographers and editors, setting up a studio in a corner of the restaurant's kitchen where Aiden could film his lessons without interrupting the daily flow of the business. It was all done on a shoestring budget, but Molly knew how to stretch every dollar, and Aiden knew how to adapt on the fly. Their first video was a simple one, Aiden demonstrating how to make a classic dish with a twist, explaining each step in a way that felt personal, accessible. It wasn't just a recipe, it was a conversation. Aiden told stories as he cooked, reminiscing about his Uncle Jonah, the lessons he'd learned in the diner, and how food had always been a way to connect with people, no matter where they came from. Molly posted the video online, added her expertly crafted tags and descriptions, and they waited. At first, it was slow, just a few hundred views here and there. But by the end of the week, something shifted. Comments started pouring in, the numbers climbed, and before long, the video had hit over 100,000 views. "People are loving it," Molly said one evening, sitting with her laptop open at the bar, her face glowing from the screen's light. "Look at this, people are sharing it all over social media. The engagement's insane." Aiden wasn't one to get too excited over numbers, but seeing people respond to the content, seeing them connect with his story and his cooking, felt like validation for everything they'd been working toward. The comments were pouring in from all over the world, people thanking him for making cooking feel accessible, for offering a lifeline to those who couldn't afford culinary school, and even for sharing his personal journey. "I've been wanting to learn how to cook for years, but I've never been able to afford classes. Thank you for doing this," one comment read. Another said, "My dad owned a small restaurant, and watching this brought back so many memories. I never thought I'd want to cook professionally, but now I'm thinking maybe I can." The messages were endless, stories of people finding hope, finding joy in something as simple as cooking. And it wasn't just adults. Teens were watching too, kids from underprivileged backgrounds who saw a future in the kitchen they hadn't considered before. The real surprise came when the graduates from Aiden's cooking school began to get involved. Molly had the brilliant idea to feature them in guest videos, letting them teach their own lessons, sharing the skills they'd learned. One by one, the former students began to shine on camera, offering their own tips and techniques, speaking to an audience that looked up to them. "It's not just about me anymore," Aiden said one day, watching one of his former students, Carlos, lead a lesson on knife skills. "This is bigger than I ever imagined." Molly smiled, her fingers tapping away on her phone as she managed the flood of new subscribers. "It's always been bigger than you, Aiden. People see themselves in these kids. They see that they can come from nothing and still make something of themselves." Within months, the channel had exploded. They were hitting millions of views, with a global audience tuning in regularly for new content. People from all walks of life, from every corner of the globe, were joining the community they'd built. What had started as a small project had grown into something massive, a platform where people could learn, be inspired, and connect. The emails started rolling in next, messages from people whose lives had been transformed by the free lessons. One came from a young woman in rural India who had taught herself to cook professionally using the videos. Another from a man in a remote part of Canada, thanking Aiden for reigniting his passion for food after years of feeling lost. And more came from young people, teenagers with stories not unlike Noah's, who had found purpose in the kitchen. But the success didn't stop at the channel. Doors began to open, opportunities neither Aiden nor Molly had ever anticipated. Companies reached out for sponsorships, cooking brands wanted to collaborate, and culinary institutions offered partnerships. Aiden turned down most of them, wary of losing the heart of what they'd built, but one partnership stood out, an offer from a global education foundation that wanted to help fund the cooking school and expand it into other cities. "This could change everything," Molly said when they reviewed the proposal. "They want to help us bring this to kids all over the world, not just through the videos, but with physical schools in different locations." It all happened faster than Aiden could have imagined. What started as a dream to help a handful of kids find their way in the kitchen had grown into a global movement. The cooking school, once a modest venture in a small New York building, now had branches in cities around the world: London, Mumbai, Johannesburg, and more. The YouTube channel had become a sensation, watched by millions, but it wasn't just the online attention that had changed things. Aiden's former students, the kids who had come through his kitchen unsure of their future, were now starting to make names for themselves. It was more than just getting jobs in restaurants, they were opening their own. Carlos, one of the first graduates of Aiden's school, had set up a food truck in Los Angeles, serving modern Latin street food with flavors he'd learned from Aiden, infused with his own family's recipes. It was a hit, and soon enough, Carlos had expanded into a full brick-and-mortar restaurant. Word spread, and Carlos was now one of LA's rising culinary stars. And it wasn't just Carlos. Aiden's former students were popping up all over the country, and even abroad. May, who had been part of the second class at the New York school, had moved back to her home city of Singapore and opened a contemporary fusion restaurant, blending local street food with techniques she'd learned from Aiden and her time in New York. Her restaurant had won several awards, and food critics were hailing her as one of the most innovative young chefs in Southeast Asia. The success stories weren't limited to those who had attended the physical school. Alumni from the YouTube channel, viewers who had learned through Aiden's free online lessons, were also finding their way. A young woman from Brazil had reached out to Aiden through email, sharing how the videos had inspired her to pursue a culinary career despite growing up in a small town with few resources. She'd since started her own catering business, serving modern twists on traditional Brazilian cuisine, and her business was thriving. Aiden couldn't believe how far-reaching the impact of the school and the channel had become. What touched him most, though, were the stories of how the lessons had helped people not just to learn how to cook, but to find confidence, to believe in themselves in a way they hadn't before. One afternoon, as Aiden sat in his office, reviewing the latest updates from his former students, Molly knocked on his door, her face glowing with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," she said, waving a letter in her hand. "The Global Culinary Foundation. They want to meet." Aiden raised an eyebrow. The Global Culinary Foundation was one of the most respected organizations in the food world, known for their work in promoting culinary education and investing in aspiring chefs across the globe. "What do they want?" Aiden asked, intrigued. "They want to partner with us," Molly said, her eyes gleaming. "They've been watching what we're doing with the school and the YouTube channel. They love how we're helping kids break into the industry, especially those who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity. They're offering venture capital to help our graduates start their own culinary businesses, restaurants, catering companies, food trucks, you name it. They want to create a global network of restaurants run by our former students." Aiden leaned back in his chair, the weight of what she was saying hitting him all at once. It was one thing to help a few students open restaurants, but this was something else. This was the opportunity to create real change on a global scale. "Are you serious?" he asked, almost unable to believe it. Molly nodded. "They've seen what our students are doing, and they want to help expand it. They'll provide the capital, the mentorship, and the resources, but they want us, well, you, to lead it. To make sure it stays true to what we've been building." Aiden took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. This could change everything. "That's the idea," Molly said with a grin. "We've come so far, Aiden. But with this, we could go even further. We could help even more kids, create more opportunities. This isn't just about restaurants anymore. This is about creating a future for people who never thought they'd have one." The partnership with the Global Culinary Foundation moved quickly. Within months, Aiden and Molly had worked with the foundation to establish a new initiative that would provide funding and mentorship to their graduates. Former students were able to pitch their ideas, and the foundation would back them with the capital they needed to start their own culinary businesses. The initiative spread across continents, creating a global network of restaurants, all connected by Aiden's original vision of giving back. Years later, Aiden sat in a makeup chair in a familiar TV studio, waiting to be called to the set. The lights were bright, the cameras were rolling, and everything about it felt oddly nostalgic. The same bustling energy, the same anticipation that came with being on camera. Only this time, he wasn't here as a contestant. He wasn't the young, unsure chef trying to prove himself in a cutthroat competition. This time, he was sitting next to Molly Turner, the very producer who had given him his break on Master Flame all those years ago. Together, they were about to film a special episode of the show, one that would reflect on Aiden's journey, the success of the cooking school, and the positive impact of their YouTube channel. As Aiden adjusted his collar and glanced at Molly, he couldn't help but feel a sense of full-circle completion. The kid from Detroit, who had once doubted whether he'd ever make it, was now a global culinary icon, not because of the restaurants he'd built, but because of the lives he'd helped transform. Molly smiled at him, sensing his thoughts. "Can you believe we're back here?" she asked, her tone light, but with a hint of emotion. Aiden grinned. "No. But I'm glad we are." When the cameras started rolling, the host welcomed them with enthusiasm, walking through Aiden's journey from his humble beginnings to his rise as one of the most influential chefs in the world. The conversation moved naturally, covering the early days of Master Flame, Aiden's success with his restaurants, and the launch of the cooking school. But what stood out most was the impact of the YouTube channel and the students who had gone on to open their own businesses. The host showed clips of Carlos's restaurant in LA, May's fusion cuisine in Singapore, and dozens of other success stories from around the world. As Aiden watched the footage, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not just for what he'd accomplished, but for what his students had built with the opportunities they'd been given. "It's been an incredible journey," the host said, turning to Aiden. "Looking back on everything you've achieved, what does this moment mean to you?" Aiden thought for a moment, his mind flashing back to the diner in Detroit, to his Uncle Jonah's worn apron and the lessons he'd learned in that small, greasy kitchen. He smiled, looking at Molly, then back at the camera. "It means that anyone, no matter where they come from, can make something of themselves if they're given a chance. That's all I ever wanted, to help people find their own path. And I'm grateful I've had the chance to do that." The episode ended with a standing ovation from the live audience, a reflection of the journey Aiden had taken, from a struggling chef to a global force in the culinary world. It had all come full circle. And as the lights dimmed, Aiden knew that this was just the beginning of an even greater story.